Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 35 of our weekly Q&A videos. We sometimes have our preamble at the start. I guess I should say, this is also not just a video, this is also accessible on some major podcasting platforms. I don't know all, most. I don't really know what the
Right.
podcasting platforms are. But you can check out the links in the description to access it there.
Right.
And here's my pitch to you. I'm about to pitch you to listen to this in podcast form, despite the fact that we lose the revenue and the metrics associated with that, because we make no money from the podcast at all. We, if we could be sponsored, don't get me wrong, we would be, but we're not at a size where we can monetize it in any way. We don't get sort of YouTube ads on it. But what I like about it is that you can put it on the same device that you're playing a mobile game. So podcasts and mobile games actually go together really nicely.
Well, people have been telling us that for a while.
Yeah.
That they like to listen sometimes when they're grinding.
Yeah. And so the problem with that is that if you're watching us on YouTube, you need two devices. If you're watching us...
Do you this? Because the couple times I used YouTube, you can it minimizes and you can have it like as an overlay.
No,
Is
you
that
can't
only
do
when
that.
you're open in YouTube?
That's only when you're open in YouTube.
Okay.
And you can do it technically outside of that, but that's only with YouTube Premium. So there's a monthly subscription fee. So you could be paying... Instead of getting this content for free, you could be paying money to access this content and then have it monopolize screen space while you watched. Or you could download it on a podcasting platform.
Right.
And then it's all gravy. It's free.
Right.
And so the only problem that opens up is that if you're listening to podcasts, there's a lot of really wonderful podcasts out there and we're just two dudes. So my podcast, but when I play games, mobile games, right, specifically, are sort of more, I don't want to say mindless games, but games where you don't need to engage as much, and it's something to do with your hands. I love listening to podcasts while I do that. So to me, if I was listening to this content, that would be my preferred way of listening to it.
Okay.
And so that's my pitch for something that is objectively worse for us if you go and do. Right. But it's also only worse for us by like a fraction of a cent, so I don't really mind. If you're having a better time with it and enjoying yourself more, that's the way you should be experiencing it.
Yep.
Because no matter what you do for us, you're not giving us enough money. Unless you're a unless you're a Patreon supporter, the amount of money you're giving us is so minuscule. And that's okay. We don't need people. This doesn't need to be a directly financial relationship, right? We appreciate comments.
It's not transactional that way.
Yeah.
No.
We obviously are doing this Q&A because people have questions and we like to sit down and be able to talk about it. So, not to sound all mercenary when I say, you're not giving us enough money.
Right.
If you don't...
I think the Q&A also gives us a chance to ramble a little bit about ideas that aren't, that are tangentially related to
Exactly.
injustice.
For example, I just talked for a couple minutes about sort of podcasts in general as like an objective thing. And you know what? I know you have something.
I do, and it's actually injustice specific.
Can I say a little bit of a funny story about podcasts recently?
Okay, all right.
Because I went on a trip.
I knew that.
And I am sure anybody who cares enough and sort of keeps up with this also knew that. So, over this trip, I went with a friend, and I got them into podcasts finally. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big proponent of podcasts. If you can't tell, it's been, sort of the entirety of this video so far.
Right.
Or podcast. And, if you're listening to me, you've already swapped over, and it's no longer a video for you. But my friend never really got podcast listening. She was like, I just don't really like it. I don't get it.
Right.
And that was fair. I'm like, not everything's for everyone. But it was weird to me, because on some level I said, I don't understand how you can just not like podcasts unless you have trouble sort of like listening and understanding without like visuals.
Right. Because
to me, there's a podcast about everything. If you want a fiction story, if you want, true crime, if you want history, if you want comedy, if you want, if you want a comedy fiction podcast, there's comedy fiction podcasts, right? If you want, so it feels like, whatever type of media you want.
Right.
Right? If you read books or watch YouTube or something like that, there's not a lot of stuff that you can't find something kind of similar or similar-ish in a podcast.
Is this going to be one of those stories where somebody realizes that they've been missing out all along on something that they really enjoy?
And it turns out it's not a topic thing, so I just thought everybody... But yeah, so anyway, she's really into podcasts now. And it turns out what the thing was, is that she was doing podcasts, she was listening to podcasts, doing the wrong thing. She didn't understand how you were supposed to listen. Oh. And she did it wrong.
So just like as the focus, as no other visual stimulation, nothing doing with your hands, just sitting there and listening to it.
So initially, people told her to listen to podcasts, and when she finally heard enough about them and wanted to give it a try, the first time she sat down, and just kind of sat in a room and the podcast was a thing. That was just
right.
it.
It's like sitting around in the 50s listening to the radio, where it was a family thing.
And it her mind would wander or it'd put her to sleep or whatever. And then she would do podcasts doing other stuff. Mm-hmm. She tried podcasts on public transit. Mm-hmm. And again, her mind would wander, whatever. And public transit for me was like a big sort of podcast listening space. That was perfect. And it turns out this was a road trip. The thing that she needed to do while listening to podcasts was driving. Oh. Because public transit is not quite enough going on. Right. You know, if she's playing like a game, like a mobile game or something like that, she tends to focus in, and she tends to be either focusing on one too much or the other too much. Right. But on this trip, it turns out that driving was a perfect outlet for podcasts. And the other thing that she liked was either in the moment being able to talk with somebody about them and have like a conversation about them, or knowing that afterwards she would be able to, you know, talk about it with somebody. Right. So what she likes is then podcast experiences that are either shared or stuff that has information that she can then take and use sort of outside of that context. Right. And so it turns out the road trip was a perfect environment. And now she's like, yeah, I was listening to a podcast this morning or whatever this afternoon. So now she's listening like as many or more than I am. And so it turns out that you just need to find the right thing. Right. So that was, I thought it was a little bit funny, is that it's one of those things that you can listen to and experience a little wrong. And I hadn't understood that, but if it's not intuitive to you, sort of the context for consumption, if it's not intuitive to you, what else you need to be doing, and sort of picking that, there's a sort of concept in psychology called like the proximal zone of like development, and then there's that idea of like focus curves and stuff, which is that basically you need the right amount of stimulation. Everybody has like a right amount of stimulation or a right amount of being challenged or a right amount of stuff happening that they operate best in, whether that's like stress or whatever else. And so for podcasts, I think there has to be this optimal zone of engaged but able to still listen. So doing something else, not only doing listening to podcasts, but then also having something else going on at the right time. And everybody's area of how much other stuff has to be going on is different. Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
And now...
So it's fun. And now... Oh, sorry.
Oh no! If you had a thought on that.
Oh no! It was just that it's funny because you're going on. You were saying that this is your focus on podcasts, and I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm going to focus on the video part, so that people who are watching this video will benefit. So
there we go.
I want to comment on the fights that are actually happening in the background while we're talking.
So now, if you've listened to me, you're on the podcast, and now if you're listening to him, you got to jump back over to the video. I led you wrong.
I don't know if you need to watch the video, but it's an interesting thing because these are just things I want to
hard. We have to be sort of opposite sides of this. I have to be fighting for the podcast, and then you have to be fighting for that like 75 cents ad revenue.
I can't even fight that hard. So here's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
So what I've been trying to do lately is make some of the footage be meaningful. And when I say meaningful, there's events for multiplayer, there's the challenge, and every once in a while I'm trying to make use of one or the other, or maybe even both.
Yeah. So you want it to be a little topical.
Right. So when I was doing the recap and thinking about how the Soul Taker Sword, the biggest benefit of it in multiplayer is the unblockable chance on basic attacks. That who could take advantage of that? You know who could take advantage of that? I thought it originally, wrongly, that it was Metahuman Flash. Because he's got hyper plated suit, which also has Flash specific unblockable. And then when you do a swipe combo, one swipe gives you 2 hits. Unlike everybody else, one swipe gives you 1. So you have twice the chance of getting a block breaking hit if they're blocking. So I thought that would be a really interesting way to do it. And if you stick in New 52 Wonder Woman, she can power him up so that he can do a special. And his special, the passive, allows him to chance at unblockable basics and triples the number of basics he does per combo. So that feels like there's a really good synergy there, right? Throw in Hawk Girl for the last one to let them tag in and out really fast, because after New 52 Wonder Woman does her special, you want to have control over when you bring in Flash. Okay. Didn't work. Yeah. So the interesting thing is, very rarely would I need Metahuman Flash, and very rarely would I need him to do some basic attacks.
And that's a great example of why we can't just tell people when they say, I got these guys, what's the team? Is because we get it wrong. maybe less than, I don't know what rate we get it right to wrong, right? I think we get it right more often than not.
But when we recommend stuff, we usually play it first.
Yeah.
So, but the interest, so that's not even the beginning of the story. I mean, sorry, that's not even the end of the story, is what I mean. That was the beginning of the story.
I haven't even started yet.
I got so much stuff to say. It's like bursting out of
Bursting at the seams was in my mind too.
So what turns out was interesting, I geared him in a way so that he could, with Enchantress, so that when he had the specials, it would give me a window where he was invulnerable to do the basics and do that. And it turns out that was really useful, not because he could do a bunch of combos, which he could. He just didn't do enough damage to make it really worthwhile. What it did was it bought us more time so that it made the opponent, even when they had power...
Swap out?
No, it meant that we were basically disabling their specials. So in New 52-1 when we could swap in really fast again and then do another special too when they had knocked him out the first time. And then you could back and forth. And then I realized, okay, you know what? I don't need Metahuman Flash. I could use anybody. So I use Martian Manhunter. Manhunter, it's so hard to get him useful because his health is decent, but his attack is so low. And so I don't need him to attack. But, nice coincidence, Martian Manhunter's gear, the Martian Manhunter garb, also has a chance of unblockables, only for Martian Manhunter. So you could get the almost same effect. You miss out on the passive of Metahuman Flash, where when you've done a special, there's the unblockable chance extra right after, right? So you still get some. So he can work a little bit like that, not to do damage, but basically getting a combo that is unblocked and it buys you more time.
Okay.
And then he does all the same stuff with Enchantress. It works. So, and again, that's the middle of the story. The end of the story is, though...
This is a 3-act story.
Yeah. So the Phantom Zone started. And so filming this week really brought home something that I hadn't experienced in a long time, because we've accumulated all the resources that we need. We're not usually under pressure to do stuff. But now I want to finish the Phantom Zone. I want to do fights with Martian Manhunter. And there's that tension there, and I can't. And I realized that we've been pretty privileged so far, that we've been playing a long time, that we've gotten away from the stress. Like,
you're Survivor, there's 3 things you want to do. And you've only got time for like 1, maybe 2 if you push it.
Challenge. You want to do multiplayer. You want to do Phantom Zone. And Phantom Zone, there's really a small number of teams and small number of loadouts that I think are optimized for it. And one of the ones is what we're using. So you can get progress in multiplayer, but you're going to be losing out on Survivor. You're going to be losing out on doing the challenge repeated times to grind credits. And if you're trying to make progress and actually improve some of your characters, you're missing out on being able to do bonus battle 6 or some of the higher levels to try to level people up. So it's just interesting. Like it was busy. So it was just an interesting week where, and the other funny thing is that I don't know that our Q&A this week is going to be long enough that you can see footage for everything. So I've got some Phantom Zone footage. I've got some Martian Manhunter and Soul Taker Sword footage. And I've got some Metahuman Flash footage. I think Metahuman Flash is going to get the short end of the stick this week. But yeah, it was just an interest. So, and you'll be able to see the footage and see why this team works really well. Oh, other thing I did was New 52-1 Woman, I gave her Claw of Horus. So what's fun about that is that she can really strip the gears. So the issue with finishing multiplayer is not there anymore, because you tag her in, she's got Master's Death card. First time, you have 2 bars, you can maybe shatter 2 gears. You tag her out, you tag her back in really fast because of Hawk Girl, you shatter all the rest. It's kind of fun. Yeah, I'm enjoying this team.
That's good. That's always our goal.
Yeah,
that's nice. Yeah, it is interesting when you're doing stuff in a game, and then it all sort of catches up to you. That feeling of being busy in a game, I think, is also something that has increasingly happened in video games, especially with games as a live service, where there's a lot of games that have little tasks. Like I've been playing some Valorant recently. Not too much, right? But with my friends when I have free time, and this is after like a while of like not really playing games, and they have like dailies and weeklies, right? Where you have to do certain things, right? In games, and sometimes it's like play a certain number of rounds, get a certain number of headshots, kills, right? By this number of items from like the armory, and so you're playing games, but then you're also going like, oh man, I gotta do a little bit more of this, and you've got like a chore list, and you're like, the week's almost over, or the day's almost over, and I haven't finished my chores yet. I can't get that XP to get that new gun this season.
There's a real balance though. So like that was the one thing I actually hated about Injustice 2.
Yeah.
Is that there was just too much to do.
Yeah.
And there was too much to think about while you were not playing in terms of planning who was going to be doing the sort of missions.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the game Renegade Midnight Star, they had daily tasks, and it was just enough. I loved it. And there was I didn't feel the same, and I was so sad when that game lost support.
Yeah, when the servers went down.
Right, because then it's literally not playable without it. But I don't know. There's a real art to finding that balance, and I feel like we're at that balance with Injustice, but only because we've been playing so long that we don't have that much to do.
Yeah, you never want to be stressed out. You never want it to feel like your job, and I think that is one of the interesting things about these games, is that they're, you know, sometimes they can be fun. I like Valorant for what it is. And to be fair, for what it is for me, is only ever playing with my friends. I will never play a game of Valorant. I shouldn't say never. But for, you know, if I
Your intention is not to play games with strangers.
If I put 100 hours into Valorant, I might put 3 hours into playing by myself at most. Like I'm playing like literally like the vast majority of time.
So it's a social thing for you.
It's a social thing for me.
Right.
Then, you know, every once in a while, maybe I'll play. I can't remember the last time I played a game by myself of Valorant though.
Right.
And so, you know, the tasks are kind of fun because you go there to hang out. You obviously want to win. You want to win your games.
Right.
And then as a secondary thing, it kind of makes you sometimes play a little bit differently, or just, you know, play basically. All of the tasks are stuff that you kind of just get by playing.
Is that because you're good enough that you don't, like, in my mind, if you're playing on your own, part of it will be to get better at it.
Yeah.
So if you're good enough that you're competitive, then you don't.
No, I'm terrible.
Oh, really? Okay.
I shouldn't say terrible. Out of my friends, I am one of the top 3 out of a group of like 7 people who play on the regular. And I would say that people might argue with me. The other people in the top 3 would say we're all at about the same level. Or, you know, some days are better, some days are worse. And I would say I'm bottom of the top 3. And, you know, there are people who never played a first-person shooter before
in your
Valorant
group.
In the group.
Right.
And so I'm better than some people. I am worse than other people.
Right.
Although, you know, better and worse is kind of relative on the day and a lot of other stuff.
Right.
And we are all collectively really bad. None of us are any good at all.
Right.
We're all, and they have a matchmaking rating sort of system, which pits you up against people at approximately your skill level.
Right.
And so the thing is that it doesn't matter that we're all good. And I wouldn't want to get that much better. Because if I'm getting better and then the other people aren't, then it's less fun. It's more fun when everybody's sort of at the same skill level and everybody's participating in stuff. And
everybody's contributing.
And so I've kind of plateaued. I'm specifically not really getting better.
Right.
Because I'm not putting a lot of extra time into it, and I'm getting like a little bit more practice. So I'm getting like really sort of slowly and marginally better, but I'm not really seeing any of those returns in any way that feels significant to me. But that's fine. It's really, it is about having fun. And there's a little bit of that sort of competitiveness. You want to win. And especially when when the other people feel about as good as you, and you really feel like you have a chance, when you feel like it's yours to lose, that can be really fun.
Right.
But, you know, I'm not playing by myself because I find it fun because there's other people and because you're having the interaction. And a lot of times when you're playing by yourself, it's really easy for one kind of miserable person to really ruin your night with it. And when I'm playing with like 3 or 4 of my, 2, 3, 4 of my friends.
So it can't be bad.
Exactly. Sometimes there's like one miserable, like, sort of wretch who's like the 1 or 2 of the remaining people who fills in when we don't have a full, because it's teams of 5.
Okay.
And when that happens, if you're playing with a group of your friends, it's very funny. It's just like, I don't understand why you're having such a bad time. I don't understand why you're mad at everybody.
Right.
Like you're yelling at us, and we're playing like the casual version, like mode of this game. Like I don't know why you're going on to video games to have a bad time. I don't understand why you're here if you're not having fun. And then you can joke about it with your friends and not be bugged by it. But if you're there by yourself and there's either not many people participating on the mic or one person who's just yelling at you and saying you're terrible at the game. You guys suck. I don't understand why you're playing like this. You're whatever. And it can just sour your mood for no reason.
Right.
And so if you're with your friends, that maybe is even a more fun game. There was a round we had where somebody was like, I don't want to play this. You guys are all terrible, whatever. And we were winning for most of the game. And then they kept disconnecting and then reconnecting over and over again. And they would sort of just shout an insult or two at us and go like, why are you guys still playing? How are you guys doing so bad since I left? And like, they weren't contributing to the team very much while they were there in the first place, but they were just mad and sort of stomping their feet going, I want to do something else. I don't understand. You have to forfeit this game so I can go do something else. And then our whole thing was like, okay, well, now we're going to see how long we can make this game last. If you're going to yell at us and say, you guys suck, you're the worst, whatever. I'm like, this game is going to last as long as we can. And we drew that game out. We were winning. And then when we were close to winning, we were like, okay, let's let the other team take a few rounds. Let's win.
Right,
let's, play really slowly.
Right.
And so that was our sort of new objective. Instead of winning was to just make this person have to sit around because they left. And I think they thought when they left it was gonna
they could be
they could do a new game.
Right.
But while the game was going, they can't quit. If they come back in, it just pops them right back into our game. So they kept leaving. They would leave for a couple minutes, and then come back and check, and then leave, and then come back, and they're like, "How are you guys still playing? What's going on?" I'm like, "Man, keep yelling at us!" Like, we would have, if they were pleasant. There's been a bunch of games where somebody's been like, "Oh, sorry, I accidentally started this one. That's my bad, or I got to do something or whatever. Would you guys mind forfeiting this match?" And then we're all like, every time that's happened, I've been like, yeah, go about your day, have a good one. And this guy was like, whatever, you guys are the worst. And I'm like, I'm gonna eat up your next half hour of time. You're gonna spend the next 30 minutes mad, man,
locked out.
Yeah, if you're gonna derogate me and my team.
So that is a little petty, but man, that's hilarious.
It is a little petty, but I'll take it. Listen, if somebody starts hurling insults, in a video game, and I'm just all I'm doing is playing the game, man. I didn't say anything rude to that person back. I'm just like, come on, man, let's just have some fun. And he's like, whatever, I hate this, I'm out. I'm like, I'm just playing. All I'm doing is playing the game. Yeah. And the best part is that he was saying in chat that he was going to throw and then get rid of it. And so then we reported him for AFK, and then you get a notification when your report's gone through. And somebody's been... there's been some punishment meted out. And so this person also got reprimanded or something. They got a mark on their account.
A demerit
for being a jerk.
A demerit for being a bad driver.
And I gotta say, it feels pretty good. I know it is a little petty. Maybe a better band than me would have acted differently. But right. It feels a little righteous.
Right.
Anyways, so we've got our first.
Do we have time for a question?
I think we just about have time for one question. Yeah.
Okay. Don't say the name until this is a question from blank, and you'll see why.
I like this question for a lot of reasons.
Oh, so do I. It's a great question.
So this is, hey guys. Before I ask my question or say anything, I want to clarify my name pronunciation, as you usually ask people how to exactly say their name. Mine is in Cyrillic letters, and in Romanized form, it is Mark Khorin.
You don't know the accent, though. Is it Khorin? Is it Khorin? I don't know.
Still not 100% sure. A lot closer, because it was, like they said, in Cyrillic letters, and I promise you, I would have said, map. It's literally not Romanized, so I would have...
Botched it.
At best, I would have tried to fit the name to my understanding of what letters approximately looked like.
Right.
The letters that I know and understand, and I would have really screwed it up. And so then they go on and say, I've watched a lot of your Q&As and Team Comp videos, which is clear from the fact that you preempted us butchering your name. As I like your style of explaining things and you're very experienced in the game, not to mention interesting conversation points and food for thought in your podcast/videos. The build up for my question, and I like this, there's headings and sections. It's very easy to follow. Since I started playing the game, I didn't know the right strategy for multiplayer team building, which for me it seems to be characters of similar stats. Not exactly max stat augments, but rather keep some cards lower promotions for better matchmaking, etc. Which is, I would say exactly right.
Right.
I really regret now that I've maxed out, including stat augments, Bats Ninja, Jessica Cruz, and Black as Batman, as they're cool and useful characters, but my matchmaking with them in the team is much more difficult than with other teams I use. My actual question, is there any sign of a stat health, damage, or both combined on a character that is more important in multiplayer matchmaking algorithm. Would not buying alliance credits for health cards but getting all damage cards be better? Any suggestion or advice on that topic would be very much appreciated. Thanks in advance.
Yeah, this is great. So the reason why this is so great, though, is it's not because it's stroking our egos. It's what it does is it gives us meaningful data to show us, yeah, this guy actually watches our video.
Yeah.
Our videos. Like, there's no other way. It's an interesting question that has enough detail about what Mark is doing to give us a real sense of what might actually be helpful.
And there's a part of it, like the alliance credits health cards and stuff, that is deep on a level that I don't know. You might have thought about that. I don't know how much I would have thought about that.
Yeah.
So it's somebody's coming to us, not just going, I have no clue, and I'm asking. It's somebody who's chewed it on it a little bit first, too.
Those are better. Yeah, I like those because there's a little bit of thought, and I think then the dialogue there gets more interesting.
It's not always an issue if somebody hasn't, but I think when somebody's thought about it a little bit and they're coming to you, oftentimes the conversation has already started. It's not just, I have no clue and this is just a question.
Right.
But I feel like I'm kind of workshopping it with this person.
Right.
Or they're coming to me with something and go, I don't know, let me think about that. Yeah.
Right. So I think the middle part where they talk about before you know what's going on and you max promote everything, I think that is one of the biggest criticisms we have of Injustice, and one place where they could really make it interesting, where once you've earned a promotion, or you can fight at whatever promotion you want.
Yeah, if you go to roll it back.
Right.
And it feels like, it's counterintuitive if you think of it as a game where you're supposed to get better guys and bigger numbers. But if you've played any significant amount of multiplayer, you understand the way that having a really unbalanced team can make it hard, like Mark has said here, to have interesting characters on any team.
Right.
Where you get this really sort of like narrow possibility space where the way that you play is dictated a lot by how high stats the people are.
Right.
And not actually, just how good they are or how interesting they are. Right. Because if one guy's too good and the other guys are not so good in terms of just pure numbers,
then they're not contributing.
You can't put them
together. Just dead weight.
Yeah.
Well, you can, but then it means that you're handicapping your team already before you start.
You don't really get that sort of interesting team. You don't get to make any team composition you want. You only get to make, a team composition with whoever the big stat person is as the main person on your team.
Right.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, then. Getting to the actual question, is there any sign of a stat, health, damage, both combined, on character that's more important? And I believe, based on just playing for hundreds, if not thousands of hours, it is both combined.
Yeah.
And is one weighted more than the other? I'm not entirely sure. But the question about which is actually better, the next part is actually what makes this interesting. So the Alliance credit stat or booster cards, you can boost health, you can boost damage. And I don't know that one or the other will change your matchups, but it will change the flavor of your fights way more. So think about it like this. We know that golds, whatever their base stats are, their health advances faster than their damage.
Yeah.
So for a given fight, you can do a certain amount of damage, you can absorb a certain amount of damage yourself, and when all your this is simplistic, and I know it's pretty obvious, and I'm gonna try to explain why I'm talking about it like this. But when you've absorbed enough damage, then the fight is over.
Yeah.
So if you increase the health stat, the fight is just gonna last longer.
Yeah.
Now maybe it gives you a better chance of surviving, but it also means that your matches are against higher stat characters.
Yeah.
And if the higher stat characters, instead of just increasing health, have increased their attack, then they're gonna have an advantage on you. Because they're going to be doing more damage per hit. Now, this is why, if you're going to be improving the stats, I think, for me at least, the better strategy is improving only damage.
Yeah.
Because it then becomes a little bit, if you think about it as being sort of unbalanced or maybe even top heavy, you do more damage, and maybe they'll have a little bit more health against you because you've increased one stat.
Yeah.
But they won't have as much damage, so you still have an advantage in the fight. But even if you didn't have an advantage, it would mean that the inflection point of the fight, the point where the fight's decided, happens faster.
That's true, and it's also a little bit more based off of your skill. You're balancing yourself towards having fights complete faster if you do well, but having room to make less mistakes before you lose. Right. And so it values sort of mastery more
Right.
than, just having a wider pool, a more forgiving sort of mistake pool.
Right. And I think you can make the fight more, you can do things to make your team hardier without actually increasing the health stat.
Yeah.
The way you plan around it, like with the Arkham team, with Arkham Knight Batgirl.
Mm-hmm. Astro Harness.
Astro Harness, right.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that early on, though, when you don't have a lot of offensive potential, there's a strong temptation to go with cards that survive longer, because the longer you survive, the better you're able to
chip away,
right, and make up for mistakes. Because when you play long enough, you're going to make mistakes, and there's nothing. Well, it's really frustrating when you've committed the time to finish the ladder and you don't finish it, and you lose all the bonuses that you might have potentially earned. Now,
so, and we have talked a lot about how for health. So yeah, I don't think out of the stats that show, which is like health and damage, it's not clear which one shows more. There's clearly a formula, there's clearly a ratio. And I think the interesting thing is that with most characters, what you have is the predetermined ratio.
Right.
And then the way that they built it in the game is that you can sort of adjust the objective base stat by 300 for each character, right? When you max them out with augments.
Right.
So that you can bring up their sort of health and attack, what's supposed to be like an equal amount.
Right.
And so, from the way when we talk about them not like letting you like de-promote people or like play them at like lower stats,
right,
it seems like the way that they've implemented this is with the idea in mind that you just obviously want somebody to have as much of both. Right. And so you'd only be limited by the resources that you have.
Right.
And so I don't know, obviously I can't sort of look into their hearts and know what they truly thought. Right. But it feels like the developers kind of just said, they'll do both, right? They'll do neither or they'll do both, and they'll just try to max out the characters that they get.
Right.
And so that this wasn't really, a question that I think we were maybe even supposed to be asking. And so the one thing that we've talked about when you talk about health or damage, right, is the other thing that we have to think about is most people are talking about this in terms of how a multiplayer fight goes.
Right.
And the other thing that we always run into when we're talking about stats is that if you have a team of the highest stat people, when you're on a ladder, normally what happens is the further up you go the ladder, you start out with fights at approximately your stats, and then you end up with fights higher than your stats.
Against opponents
higher than your stats, yeah.
Right.
And so the only time it makes sense to really boost everything is the team that you're playing with is already fighting a bunch of people with the best gear.
Right.
And you're fighting sort of the same really high stat teams. Because once you've hit the point where if you are the highest stats possible, period, in the game, all of a sudden, your later fights, people can't have better stats than you.
Right. Right.
So if you have like the dominant team, I don't even know, I haven't even thought about it because that's not how we play. We're not crunching those numbers in that way. But if you have like a really sort of dominant, massive stat team, at that point, there is a clear answer, which is do everything. Right. Because by the end of your fights, you're going to be fighting people with absolutely the highest stats in the game as well. But if there's nowhere to go above you because you are
or above
at
them.
The top. Yeah.
Nobody above them.
Yeah. If there's nobody above the
your
team
opponents.
that you've made.
No. I think what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is that if there's nobody, if your opponents are already maxed out.
Yeah.
Then you might as well just take that next step.
Yes.
And max yourself out because you're going to be facing the same opponents.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a situation in which you would want to max everybody out.
Right.
But, we don't play like that. And it sounds like Mark is also not really planning on playing like that because they're, already expressing regret for maxing out the people they have. And I don't believe any of these people are like the highest, like pure stats in the game.
So I do want to point out that besides asking about what does have an effect, it's as important to talk about what doesn't have an effect.
That's true.
Because some of those augmentations are even more important. So, for example, critical chance, critical damage, neither of those has an impact. And we, again, anecdotally, but based on when we augment only those, we're facing the same opponents.
Yeah.
And the reason why, in my mind, is because it's looking at the fixed attack and health that are taking into account gear, but 100% of the time, so that when crit chance isn't, it boosts your damage overall, it averages out, so you do higher damage, but a lot of times it's not, so it doesn't count against you.
Yeah.
And that's why those fights give you a huge advantage.
Mhm.
So,
another thing that seems like it doesn't have an effect, or at least if it is, it's weighted in a way that it's much weaker, is gear.
Mhm.
Right? Because you do have a gear score.
Well, that's as interesting. Because gear,
Yeah.
there's gears that will boost health.
Yeah.
Gears that boost health, passives that boost health, that changes matchmaking.
Yeah.
But gears that boost basic damage, no, because it's only one aspect of damage. Gears that boost special damage, only one. So that's the other perfect example. Red Sun team, the original Red Sun team was Superman, Wonder Woman, and Solomon Grundy.
Yeah.
Superman, on that team, boosts basic damage by 75%.
Mm-hmm.
Not taking into account matchmaking. And you see the difference when you get into fight, and you can, before the Tantu Totem, the Red Sun team, you can mow through everybody.
Yeah.
Solomon Grundy, on the other hand,
boost health by 15% for every Red Sun teammate.
And that actually hurts you. He's like the worst. He is absolutely the worst Red Sun character because he has a passive in multiplayer
that just slows down fights.
It makes your fights harder.
Yeah, it slows down fights and makes them harder. That's true.
So you've got more health. Your opponents are stronger. On the other hand, you've got Superman. He makes the fights easier if you're leaning on a basic attack strategy. And if you're early on, you don't have Tantu Totem, then that's the fight that you actually have to have.
Yeah.
And for most people, that's true because Tantu Totem comes around every 40, 30 something, 40 something.
Yeah.
30 something weeks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting because the strategy that you want then is if you're going to augment your team, the really important augmentations are crit chance and crit damage.
Mm-hmm. And you almost want to do those first because then your fights start getting easier.
The problem, though, is Survivor doesn't give them to you like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that you're going to be spending a lot of time or sitting on a lot of attack and health augmentations. And I know from experience, it's very hard to do that when you feel like that there's an easy way to make offline play easier.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the interesting things is that for these sort of augments, what matters a lot is how you plan on using them. And so if you've got an offline grinding team, then that team is somebody that you probably do want to pump all your stuff into.
Right.
But so if you haven't picked one, you almost want to look at everybody and go, who's the boringest guy?
Right.
Who's the person I definitely don't want to bring online? And then that also gives you the secondary benefit of not having the same energy pool being used by your offline and online play.
Right.
So that you can play more in a meaningful way before you have to stop. But then you're really relegating your offline grinding to be like as boring as possible. Yeah. And I think the problem is that on its best day, the offline grinding is not nearly as good as the online play. Right? But, then you're committing us talking about, chores and tasks that games give you. It gets a lot closer to a task in order to get resources and stuff than it does something that, you'd be willing to do by itself for hours and hours and hours just with no sort of reward at the end of the tunnel. You need your little sort of booster pack. Or whatever you're trying to get money for, the levels if you're trying to get experience for somebody. You need that secondary reward to make it worth your while. They need to bribe you a little bit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, power gen also is not counted in matchmaking.
Yeah.
Just forgot. Just to finish that thought and be complete about it.
Mm-hmm.
I love this question.
Damage reduction also isn't, is it?
I'm pretty sure it's not. Yeah. So that is effectively more health.
Yeah.
But it...
Secret health.
Right. Again, Containment Doomsday. New 52 Superman, where his health is or his damage taken is reduced.
Yeah, that's another thing. Revives, right? Revives aren't counted in health pool as far as we can tell.
Right.
Yeah,
it's definitely an interesting question. I mean, we've touched on a lot of these before, but not brought them together like this in this kind of specific question. So I really appreciate. Thank you very much, Mark, for asking. That was a great.
Yeah. And so I think we have time for one more really quick question. So? Yeah, I think this one will only be a couple minutes anyways. Because Realos of Astora says, is there a Reddit thread or spreadsheet somewhere where I can see this damage multipliers for specific character specials? You mentioned that Arkham Knight Catwoman only does 75%.
Yeah, no, we don't. That would be a lot of work. It'd probably be interesting to do it. But what we do is we just look at our collection and sort according to the attack stat. And once you do that, then you can compare characters at the same... They don't even have to be all maxed out, right? They don't even have to have the same base stat. If you get them to the same attack stat level and look at their special 2 damage that's posted on the card, you can see the number. Yeah.
So if you're trying to figure out and compare that, you can sort of do it in a bootleg version by yourself pretty easily.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's kind of fun. That's actually a useful tip if somebody's trying to get deep in the data but you don't want to be if you want to be a little bit of a nerd about it, but you don't want to be so systematic with it that you have to write down everything and store it in a spreadsheet, because then you'd also need to be like, oh, you need to have like every character at like the same level or something or whatever else, or you need to do the formula.
Okay, and so the thing is, we are stat nerds though. So when we talk about the weekly challenge and the multiplayer rewards, we actually do have a spreadsheet with, since maybe 2019, of all the different challenges and all the different multiplayer rewards. Yeah. And looking at patterns, and they're color coded a little bit.
And that's how we found the pattern.
This is how we found the pattern. And this
by
is how
we, I mean you.
Yeah.
You were the curator of this data. I did not get that deep into it.
Yeah.
But you do not do hobbies by half.
I do not.
No.
And so I think this is why, part of the reason why this has been successful, because we've been able to play it for so long. Mm-hmm. We were able to sort of pick out little details of stuff to, tweak whatever advantage you might have in the game.
And so there we go. I think that is a good place to stop for the night. So I'd like to give it a shout out to Eliza, lab worker Kaiten. She's working long hours in the lab for her thesis, just trying to get by. And this shout out was brought to you by a level of dedication to lab work so great that some people apparently sleep in the lab and actually bring sleeping bags so they can have a better time in the lab.
Oh, okay. All right. So how do I tell this story without totally outing myself? Okay. So when I was working and I was basically apprenticing, there were people that would sleep under the desk in the office when they had to do overnight stuff.
Oh my goodness.
So that they wouldn't have to leave to go home before the next day of work.
Oh my god. Yeah, so apparently some people literally will sleep in the lab and they will have like sleeping bags or like a setup. Right. And they'll do the same thing.
So it's not George Costanza where you're sleeping on the job when you're supposed to be working. Mm-hmm. This is like people who are sleeping there because they don't want to waste the time that it takes to commute that would keep them away from work.
It's not even that. It's not the commute time. It's that they so Eliza is in a biology lab.
Okay.
I won't get more specific than that. But you'll have experiments that complete at certain times. There will be, like reactions or whatever else. I don't really even understand. It's at a level of sort of that field that is much past my sort of knowledge and working model. So I don't even really have any way of conceptualizing the work that she's doing. Right. Because it's too sort of in the weeds specific. Esoteric. But so if you have like a test that needs to be checked on at 3 a.m., you just need to be there at 3 a.m. And so the hours before and after that don't really matter. Your time is your own around that.
You can't plan it so that it triggers at a time when you would actually be there? Or is that like a lower level of dedication where you're not just motoring through it as fast as you can?
Maybe you can, but what if it, takes like from when you start it, 11 hours? Or 7 hours or whatever. Maybe there's like multiple stages where you have to do something a certain number of hours later, do something else, and a certain number of hours later, do something else. So as a continual thing,
like you couldn't stop. Like if it was something 11 hours, I'd want to do it first thing in the morning. Yeah. So that I could finish it just as I was leaving work.
But you're expecting to be at work for 11 hours? That's already like time outside of your...
Better than 3 o'clock in the morning.
Maybe not for some people, but so the point is that there's a lot of things in the lab that work on their own schedule. Yeah. And you kind of just have to be like the bacterium's like, bus plane.
That was not the word I was thinking of, but...
Same letter. Yeah. But you kind of just have to... You're at the beck and call of whatever it is that you're working on. Right, so you just have to be around for it.
It's like that Seinfeld joke, aliens come down to the planet. They're looking at us. Yeah. And they are seeing us walk our dogs and pick up their poop. Yeah. And they're thinking, so who's really the master here? Yeah. Who's really the boss? The guy with the leash? Or the guy picking up the poop.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's apparently it's very hard to do that and then also maintain an active and vibrant sort of social and personal life outside of the lab while you're working on something. But anyways, neither here nor there. That's Eliza lab worker Kaiten. And we'd also like to give a huge thank you to all the lovely folks who support us on Patreon.
And that would be Bumble Ben, Console Peasant, and Edwoon supporting us at the top tier Last Word. Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, Eddydoo, and Hoshi 127 at the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isra E at the gratitude level.
There we go. Thank you so much all for your support. Thanks so much all of you for watching too. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.